I had a request for painting crystal, so I have chosen a reference. Now, before I actually start drawing and painting and all of that stuff, I want to talk about how I arrived at this particular image. And I think one of the best ways for me to show this is just to actually hold up my phone here and show the different things that I tried in order to get a reference picture. Okay, so this was my very first shot. Okay, I had taken it basically in the same place as this. But I didn't zoom in with my camera, and I found that the perspective was a little bit exaggerated for what I wanted. So I also found that maybe the background was a little bit distracting. Now, if you're using a 35mm for your reference image, you have the ability of putting that background out of focus, which I would suggest, to make your main subject more focal, literally. Okay, so what I did was I pulled the camera back away from the crystal and I used my fingers to zoom in. And so now you see the same image, but with less distortion. All right, so I am aiming directly at this is a patio door, so it's looking outside, so the light is behind my subject. All right, so what if I took it from another angle? Oops, hang on just a second. All right, so if I took it from another angle and put a dark background behind it, I get a completely different thing, right? So I get a really different viewpoint and an entirely different lighting. Look how dark this one is on the sides versus this one, which is very light on the sides. So with a dark background in this case, and the light coming in from the side, I get a completely different scenario. All right, so again, I zoomed away. I pulled away, I pulled my camera a little further away, or my phone, and then I zoomed in with my camera only. Now, you can tell by this and this, the ellipses at the top and bottom, how exaggerated they are there, and how, this now becomes a lot less. So I've zoomed in a little bit with my fingers. Okay, so now what would a white background look like? And a white background with the lighting coming from the side, it's okay, but there's no really great darks for that high contrast, for that full value range. So I decided this one was not the most interesting image for me to work from. All right, so I went back to this and let me see here. Okay, then I took a video, and as I move the camera down at different angles here, you can see, watch how the light changes within the crystal itself, and you can see this dark line here and how it kind of gets and cuts off. Let's play that one more time. So this is starting at the top, so a different viewpoint. And then as it comes down, watch what's happening in this area here. Okay, look how that changes. And as soon as those highlights get into the highlight area above, you don't see them as much. But you do see all this great contrast here. So what I did was I basically took the last view of this video, did a screenshot, and ended up with this image here. So, so when you're doing your reference pictures, give it some thought. A lot of people will just, plunk a piece of crystal or glass or something on a table, not consider the light source, not consider the background. There's a lot of considerations when you're making a reference picture. Now, when I'm working from a reference picture, or when I'm painting crystal or glass, I will work from a reference picture as opposed to working from life, mainly because you can see by this video, every little single shift is altering all the patterning and the lighting and everything else. Look how that all changes, you know, with just the slightest change. Now, if I lean left or right, I would get the same sort of thing, right? So it's important to make sure that you kind of lock in where your highlights and shadows are going to go to make your life a little simpler. Okay, so let's get to the drawing part of this. I'm working on some Arches 140-pound cold pressed paper. I'm just going to use a standard pencil here for this, and I have my mainly Da Vinci watercolors, but there's some Winsor Newton in here, some Core, which is by Golden. There's I think there's even a Daniel Smith in here as well, but we have lots of variety in here that I could choose from. Although mainly this is a mostly colorless image, I could inject some color into it. I don't have to follow the colors that are there. I could certainly add some more. So I'm going to set this aside. I'll get to brushes when it's time for painting, but let's get to this. Just before I do, good morning, Catherine. Oh, okay, that's no problem. I guess I do save my my live videos for you to watch later if you have to. Good morning, Dorothy. All right, so the first thing I want to do is determine the middle. So I'm just going to take my pencil and make a straight line. And because my crystal here, in this particular case, is straight on, now I do still have a little bit of exaggerated perspective here, but I don't mind that in this case. So I'm looking where, here's the top, okay? I'm pointing my pencil at the image here. So the top of my crystal is here and the bottom is here. So I want to find the midpoint, about halfway. And I can see where it lands on my crystal. So if my halfway point is about here, then I know the bottom of the part that holds the wine, the top, is going to be slightly below that, just slightly. Okay, so I'll put a straight line there. I'll put a line at the top and bottom of where I want to have my pardon me, where I want to have my wine glass fit into my my work area here, my paper. All right, so now I want to look to see how far is the top of the opening of the glass and the far side of the opening of the glass. So basically I've got an ellipse. So I want to see how far from here to here I want to make it. And looks to be, I'm eyeballing this, but I would say about there. Maybe a little less than that. All right. So now the width of my, I don't know, I've got the cup part, I'll call it the cup part. The width of the cup is approximately there. Now it has to be the same distance on both sides, so I will measure that. It's got to come over a little bit more. All right, so I know that is the width of the top of my vase. Now I know that I need to make an ellipse fit into that area. So I'm going to do a real sharp turn because I don't have a lot of space to work in right there. All right, so I've got to go pretty tight with this. All right, so I have the ellipse. I think it could be a little bit bigger. I made it shorter, but now I'm thinking it should probably be a little bit bigger. So right, so I've got that. I've got the bottom of this. Now, as I said, this was a request to do crystal today, so I hope you're watching. If you made the request, I forget who that was. There we go. Okay, so I'm trying to get the angles right here. Now, this is interesting because at the camera eye level, now I'm saying camera eye level because I'm obviously standing above this. I'm just holding the camera low. But at the camera's eye level, or at the level of the lens, look at this line here. Shouldn't that be round? Not if it's at eye level. So in this case, we're looking at a straight line. Right here, right in the middle of the vase or the cup. All right, so for the bottom, let's get this circle, this ellipse. I'm going to make this. And is it as wide as the top? It looks to be. It looks to be just about as wide. So I'm going to work within the height and width of that space to make my ellipse. Now, when you're drawing perspective, these are things you need to look at. Like how much distance is there between the top of that circle or ellipse, the oval shape, and the bottom of it versus the width. A lot of people will make this opening much too round. I mean, it's a round opening, right? Obviously, it's a round opening. But when you put it in perspective, that really changes how that looks. All right, so now the middle of this, let's see, that bump in the middle of the stem is about halfway, I would say. So I'm going to put a line right here. And this is quite rounded. Good morning, Melody. Hi, Diana. Evelyn. Thank you for joining. It's not quite as wide as the crystal here. So I wanted to show the drawing process. I know some people think, oh, you trace your stuff, and I don't always do that. I definitely encourage drawing. I think once you draw something, you have a much better understanding of it. Occasionally, I will trace. Yes, you can call the cops on me. I will trace, but usually that's if I've got something that's really complex that I can't work out. All right, so the bottom of this stem does not stop, doesn't go exactly to the middle of this oval. It's a little bit higher because we're actually seeing more of the front of the base than we are the back. All right, so okay, so there's a little ellipse in here. It goes a little wider than that. And then there's these strong shapes that come down here. There's this really light shape right there, followed by another light shape. This is a pinwheel crystal, which admittedly I don't use very much. I probably should. All right, so there's a lot of lines here. Now, this center part, that's where things start getting really complex, right? Now, the temptation is to put it between here and here, but that's not the case. It actually, look at the very top of that pinwheel, actually interrupts this line, doesn't it? It kind of cuts across. So right across here, there's a part that goes right through there. So this starts about here. And really, I'm just looking at the larger shapes, and I am kind of counting how many there are. Just looking at the larger shapes for now. This one goes straight across. And there's one. So I'm kind of thinking of this like a clock. Let me zoom in on this. You can see this a little better if I zoom in, I'm sure. So I'm thinking of this as a clock. Well, this one's kind of pointing at, you know, just maybe between 2 and 3 o'clock. This one's pointing at 4 o'clock. This one's pointing straight down towards 5 o'clock. This one's pointing towards 7. This one's pointing, you know, and so on. And so I'm looking at this in terms of a clock and the direction that a clock face hand would go. Okay, so this didn't line up quite as I wanted, so I've got to make adjustments. So I'm going to do that now before I get any paints out. I'm going to do all my adjusting. This probably has to be a little higher. Yeah, because this is just a little below that point. I'm looking at the point here. I'm thinking it's just a little bit below, so I'm not going to go too low. All right. And then there's a really small star-like design in the middle, but I'm not going to think about that too much. Those are really smaller details. I can actually do that with my brush. I've just got my main basic stuff in here, and I think I can work from this. There's a couple little interruptions of the dark areas in here. Now I'm going to just work on this oval a little bit, or this ellipse, to get this a little bit more convincing. So I'm making all these adjustments before I commit to it with paint. All right. There's some real dark areas right along here. There's kind of a line there, dark area here, and I'm constantly looking at my reference to see where these darks are. There's kind of another reflected ellipse there. Now, one thing that's going to be important is to show a little bit of my background, because there's reasons why there's highlights and shadows all within here, and your background has everything to do with it, as I showed earlier in my reference images. So by having this contrasting background where you've got sort of darker area against lighter area, that's helping to set up those strong contrasts within my crystal. All right, so we're getting there. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, get rid of some of the lines I don't need. I'm going to do this very gently with this eraser because I don't want to abrase my surface here at all. I want to keep this paper nice and good shape for receiving paint and water. And so I want to be very gentle when I'm erasing. I'm using, this is a Staedtler, I think this is nylon eraser, but those pink ones, or you have to be careful of those pink ones. They leave a stain sometimes. Another one that I really like, I especially like using a kneaded eraser on my watercolor paper because it's a lot gentler. I could take and warm it up a little bit in my hands, and I could erase a few small things, you know, if I need to. Now that wasn't something I needed to erase there, but just to show. All right. So do I need to draw all these details in? I am going to choose not to, because I find that if I draw so many details, I end up being confused. And if they're that complex, there's a lot of fudging I can do. So, all right, so let's start painting. We're going to make this a fairly quick demo today, I think. So I'm going to be using, this is a soft squirrel hair brush, holds a lot, has a really nice point to it, so that'll allow me to get sort of really nice shapes in some areas. Now I have choices right now. I'm looking at this reference image right here, and I'm trying to determine whether or not I need to use masking fluid. I could use masking fluid, and then I could put some really nice smooth washes in there and everything else. But the reason I'm using a squirrel hair, a natural hair brush, is because I can fill it up, start painting, and keep it going. And as long as I can keep it going, I will have a reasonably smooth wash for what I need. Now I'm going to be skipping around a lot of pattern there. If I lose any of my details, I would be able to come back in with some white paint afterwards if I need to. Usually I will try to use masking fluid, but just for the sake of making this a faster demo, I'm going to do it just without, and possibly add some masking fluid afterwards. Or not masking fluid, white paint. Not using masking fluid. All right, so I'm going to begin with some, what can I start with? I think I'm going to start with some, I'm going to use some neutral tint here. All right, so I'm going to thin it. Let me get this on screen here. I've got some other stuff on this, in this portion. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to mix my neutral tint. I think this is Winsor Newton neutral tint. Can't remember. And I'm just going to jump right in. Let's go a little thinner than this. What I'm seeing is that this part of the glass, because we're looking through two thicknesses, is darker than this part at the top. All right, so I will be working around my whites. So here we go. That's probably a little darker than I want. So I'm going to just quickly get in there with some water, and I can spread out that color so that it doesn't end up being too dark. Now you've got to remember, of course, that paint or the watercolor always dries lighter. So there's some areas here that are going to be dark. So I'm going to go right into my pattern there with this color. And right across half, because each one of these pinwheels is half dark, half light. You know, each one of them. All right, so then there's little bits of, like little slivers of the patterning showing through there. So I'm adding that in. And half of this. And I'm looking for all these lights. Now you might be looking at this and going, oh man, that's way too complicated for me. One thing you might find helpful is to take a pencil and pencil in where these, very lightly of course, but pencil in where these areas are. But essentially that's what I'm doing with paint. So I'm going really light color here. Is there any lights on this side? Not really. It's pretty much all just a smooth wash here. So I'm just going to come in with this until I get to this light area down here. Oh, and then there's some complex stuff in here. Okay, so when you get to the complex stuff, that's where I can just kind of hint at stuff. I'm not going to agonize over every little bit. I could. I absolutely could. Looking here. Okay, so what about that middle? I'm going to grab some more color here. This middle has this very light pattern in here, and I'm basically just going to hint at this. So it kind of connects all of these with little bit of a design here. But it's something like that. But I'm actually seeing kind of a double image because I'm actually seeing the one on the other side of the glass as well. So that creates a lot of distortion, which is actually going to help me because then I don't have to be too perfect about this. I can really just sort of hint at a lot of this. I know it's not perfect, but it's getting the idea across. All right, so that looks kind of dark right now because the only thing you're seeing right now is the white paper. And so when you only see the white paper, it seems dark by comparison. Let's take this right up along this top. I'm going to go a little darker maybe along here. And one continuous motion. If I can. I'm at an awkward angle here. Normally I would turn my work around, but I'm going to try to get that reasonably right. Now I'm going to come in and start adding a few more of this. It's sort of light, my first value. The only thing I have to think about in this particular part here is the light areas. That's the only thing I'm painting around. I'm going over all the dark areas. Don't have to worry too much about any of that. Okay, so there's a few little light bits in here. I'm just going to skip around them. I have to work around this funny shape at the bottom. Okay, this is pretty smooth right through here. So I'm just going to come in and get that filled in. You see how far this brush can take paint? Like it just is going and going and going. It's not running out. So that's really what I want here. Is to be able to come right along here and paint without stopping. Now there's a little bit of, I can see a little bit of greenery. You can see in the reference here there's some plants, and so there's a little bit of green that's happening in this area here. I'll add that in afterwards, I think. This is the speedy way of painting crystal. There are multiple ways of doing it. I'm going to do it the most sort of immediate and I guess loose, if you want to call it that, loose way of painting this. All right, this area in here, really bright, but there's some darks in here. So I'm just going to take my brush and indicate this shape. Something like that. I can approximate things. It doesn't have to be exact. I can approximate things and totally pull this off. It'll be just as convincing, and if you don't show somebody your reference picture, they will believe every bit of it. So, coming across here with a few varied lines. There's going to be a real dark that goes down there. Boy, oh boy. That one side is going to be really dark. I'll just put that in there just to sort of lock it in. Go over that with dark later, but then there's sort of another section here. And for the most part, okay, this has got to go a little higher. This has got a little sliver in there. Coming down to this sort of a kneecap, if you want to call it that, kneecap for the stem. This sort of decorative bump in the middle. There's a gap in there, and all of this area gets filled in. Lower section. Okay, so we've got the darks on each side, which right now I don't have any dark paint. I'm not going to stop to switch to dark paint. I'm just going to paint it this color all the way through. So all of this is going to be kind of monotone, very one color type of thing. And then down in here we've got some little bit of striping and some darks at the sides of this, you know, base where it connects to the base. All right, so now this is, I'm going to thin this down a little bit more just because it's not quite dark, and I'm just going to paint following the shape here. So I'm going to paint and leave some light areas within here. Nice kind of wet brush here. Keep my brush wet so that I can keep the paint flowing. And just going to go in on this and leaving some good strong light areas in there. Now I kind of missed there. I'm just going to pull that off right away so I don't get the dark in there. And yeah, there's so there's a big area in here with a reflection of that stem. So right below the stem, I've got some of the stem reflecting in this glass. Now, part of what's going to make the edge of this base appear is when I put a dark tabletop in there, a darker tabletop. Good morning, Verna. Hi, Anne. All right, so I'm looking at shapes. I'm looking at values, really looking at values. Values are going to be like so important in this. And I'm really following the drawing that I did in terms of keeping the perspective. All right. Now I'm going to put this tabletop in here. A little bit more color here. This is all just neutral tint right now, and as long as this is dry and I can work up against it, I'm okay. And this ends right below the knee, so I'm just going to put a straight line across there. And as I paint this background, I'm going around the shape. So I'm not going to paint right to the edges of my paper. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm going to come in along here. And just imply the table. Now it has to match up to the other side. Right. And again, I want to keep the edges of this nice and light. Let's get a little more color here. Oop, picked up a glob. There's a glob on the end of my undissolved color. Nope, that had a bit of green in it. That's okay. I don't mind. Can have a little green in it. Doesn't matter. As long as it's the correct value, it doesn't make one bit of difference. Okay, so just let that go across. I'm going to do a little bit down below because if I do a little bit below, I can show a little bit of the shadow on the table as well. Oops, that started to dry. Ah, what have I got in there? Some green. That's what you get for not cleaning your palette. Okay, so why do I want to show this? It's mainly because I want to show some of the dark reflection on the tabletop as well. Now the tabletop is not shiny like the glass, so it's not going to have sharp, hard shapes. It's going to have a much softer shadow here. So I'm just picking up a little bit of this and working into this while it's wet. I'm going to come down and just imply the reflection there. There is a little bit of dark that comes around the edges, right where the glass touches the table. Whenever things touch a surface, you're going to get an extra dark shadow there where it makes contact. And in your painting, you'll do a very crisp, strong line there to imply that. All right, so we've got sort of a ghost version of our crystal. I've got some darks I'll put in here as well, but I'm going to wait for that because if I meet this tabletop, then I'm going to be running into trouble because wet into wet and it'll bleed. But I can come in now and before I get too carried away with details and all of that, I'm going to start taking some of that green. I'm going to take, let's take a little, I'm going to take a little aureolin and cobalt blue, mix up a green, maybe a little more blue. It's not summer anymore, so we don't have this nice yellowy green. Let me pull this down so you can see. That's a little bit on the bright side, but I'm putting it over top of something that's gray. So if I'm putting it over top of something that's gray, it's going to automatically dull down my color. So I don't want to go in with a dull green and end up with a gray green. I just want to get a little bit of color in here. Oop. Wet paint. All right, so I'm going to come in with some of this in a few spots. I'm going to find a few little places where I can put a bit of this in here. And it lands in the most surprising places sometimes. That's the thing with crystal, is it has all these facets that reflect in different directions, and so you get all these crazy places for colors, where colors show up and things like that. So just little bits of green, and you can see that it's much greener here, much brighter here than what I put on there. So All right, not too much of this actually, just a little bit. There's not that much showing. A little bit in between these two bright spots, but that's pretty good, I guess. All right, so now I'm going to come back into my neutral tint here. And I'm going to go a little bit stronger this time, just a little. I don't have to go a lot stronger because if I'm putting it on top of something that's already painted, it's not going to be, it's already going to double how dark it is going to be. So if I use the same value and put it over top, it's going to be darker automatically because the first, unlike acrylics or oils, the layer underneath will show through because what I'm putting on is transparent. All right, so now I'm going to start trying to iron out where some of these darker areas are because the top of my crystal is pretty much dry other than the green areas. Let's see if I can get this a little darker. This is actually got the rim on the other side actually shows a little bit dark as well. Now, it's very important not to make a complete oval here because the highlight interrupts that pattern. And not all of these are going to be really dark. And I haven't gone really dark yet. I'm going to go to a really dark at the very, very last step. But I'm trying to be a little bit more cautious as to how I'm applying my color now. Will be a little more important. So I'm just looking at one shape at a time. What's that shape bringing me? Is it, is it light, dark, medium? All right. This one's all dark. Keep in mind that I'm doing the, maybe a value 7 on the value scale. I haven't got to my 10 yet, so I haven't got to my darks yet. So all right, so there's quite a dark line that comes down here. Pardon me, I'm a little hoarse today. All right, some darks that come down here. This comes down and actually kind of connects to that light section right there. I'm gonna get that in there. And a lot of darker area in here. Let's see if I can get this line straightened out a little bit. Pardon me. I see a triangular shape right there. I'm working side by side with my image. Maybe I can zoom in and they'll be about the same size. So working side by side, I can see that there's a triangular shape there. There's little shapes within here, but I'm not going to get too fussy or particular about these. Crystal's kind of like an abstract form. It's always changing with every shift of your head. So in that sense, it can be very forgiving to paint. All right, next side. So I'm working from bigger shapes, and then I'm breaking down the bigger shapes into smaller shapes. And as I'm breaking down these into smaller shapes, I'm able to bring in darker values at the same time. Okay. Let's come down this side. I see some darks in here. And I'm just looking, what is that shape? I don't have to think about the color. I don't have to think about the value. I've only got one value in my brush at the moment. I'm just concentrating on what is that shape. There, like with crystal, you get a lot of hard edges. So one thing I'm not having to worry about is softening a lot of edges here. There could be some of that, you know, like down in this part maybe. There might be some edge softening, but not too much. Crystal, one of the reasons that I chose this is it really shows the sparkle of the crystal. So it, I don't have to have a lot of softened edges, and that's not necessarily why I picked it. I picked it because visually it just has more impact. If you don't have sparkle in your reference picture, it's not going to show up magically in your painting. So going back to what I started with earlier about the paying attention to your reference image, you want to make sure that you get a good reference to start with. Okay, so there's sort of some crisscross lines here. I'm not going to fuss too much. I could get really fussy, and I can feel myself wanting to do that, but I'm gonna just get a little bit more liberal with this and get looser, because I don't want to get bogged down with detail, right? Leave a few spots in there, work around the main one, and that will be fine. Okay, some darks in here, and yeah, so all right, starting to shape up. Now I'm going to come down. I'm going to come down to some of these areas down at the in the stem, and I'm going to add a few darks in here. Mid value, I should say, a value 7 perhaps. Still have a way to go. Kind of missed the shape there. So I'm going to get this little dip that comes down. Some of the darks that on the sides. Just, I will be coming in with dark to do these, but just so I don't lose them, I'm going to, now here's the reflection, and I'm just indicating this with, this is like a, I'm not thinking, oh, this is the reflection. I'm thinking, wow, that's a really strange shape at the base of that wine glass, and I'm just going to paint that really abstract shape that I'm looking at. So I don't have to think, oh, that's got to look like this, or has to look like that. I'm just looking at the shape and painting the shape that I'm seeing. All right, I can come in with a little bit more color here. Get a nice shape to that base. That's kind of a crucial shape. And then of course there's the shadow below. Get really up on the tiptoe of my brush here so I can get a finer line. And yeah, so it's starting to come. Now let's just jump into a couple of darks. So we've got, I've got the white of the paper, I've got a light mid value, I've got a darker mid value, and now I'm going to my darks. I could do this in multiple stages and definitely do lots and lots of values, but I can get the same effect if I'm jumping into my darks here, because with crystal you can definitely get a lot of high contrast, like real dark stuff, real full range of value, dark stuff right beside light stuff, which actually helps add the sparkle to your crystal. So some of these extra darks, so I'm just less diluted color is what I'm using here. And again, I'm breaking up some of the smaller shapes that I made in the last value. Good morning, Anne. Hi, KG and Loga. So just coming in with some of these darks, really watching that shape. Another dark here. And the darks are really what make the crystal sing. Like you really see that sparkle happen once you add some of these darks. And with these shapes, I'm looking, okay, well, this gets a little, like the skinny part, I'm working on the skinny end, and boy, these shapes turn from really dark or really skinny to really fat, right? Because that shape has to get stretched out into that little corner. So now, let's get a few of these ones in here into the actual pinwheel. Love this stage of the painting where you can add those darks and really make this crystal look shiny. Funny little bit just on the tip. So the thing with crystals are actually a great thing to practice with, because it changes so much. You can't paint what you think should be there. You have to paint what you see. you almost don't have the option, because it's so so clear. Like literally and figuratively, it's clear to see the lights and darks. Often people say to me, "Oh, your glass is so realistic," and if you think of it in terms of values, it's really quite quite straightforward, because you don't have, I shouldn't say you don't always have these edges that you have to soften. Okay, you can see I'm slowing it down now, and I'm paying attention not to get too crazy with these darks. I want to get them in there, but I don't want to lose the mid values that I put in entirely. This triangular shape that I did before, I'm going to reinforce that, make that a little darker. But by this time you can really see how important that reference picture would be. If I had gone with the earlier one with the white background, this one, there's hardly any darks in there. You don't see the pattern on the crystal so well, and you know, the base isn't too bad. I can actually see the base fairly well, but yeah, this one would, to me, would not be as sparkling as this last one that I worked with. So whenever you are doing your crystal setup, keep all of those things in mind. The angle of the camera or the phone or whatever you're using, especially how close you are, because if you're, you know, if you're photographing a small object, the closer you get, the more distorted it becomes. You know, have you ever seen a photo of somebody's dog and they're standing right over top of their dog, and the nose is gigantic and the body is really tiny? So you get that extreme distortion. So one thing that you can avoid getting that distortion is by pulling the camera away and zooming in with your lens or with your fingers if you're using a phone or an iPad or something like that. All right, so here's these shapes. I've got to be really quite specific in some of these areas here. So some real contrasting darks here, which I love. So this comes down and comes right underneath, right into this little dip thing there. Comes down into there. And love that little shape there, like the little bits and pieces. Sometimes they go across, they connect to the other side, and sometimes they don't. It all depends on your lighting and the type of crystal and all of that. Okay, so let's get back up into here and get some of these ones on the left side done. The base, where it connects to the table. This is where I really want to get this shape good and dark and accurate as much as possible, as much as you can. So I'm actually going to shift my camera or my hand angle so that I can get a little bit more of a smooth line. It's an awkward angle for me to go like that. Okay, so I've got some pretty sparkly crystal there. And the only thing that's really not making sense so far is that I don't have a background. So I'm going to let's go to a bigger brush here because I'm basically just going to fill some of this in. So I'm not going to do all this detail. There's brick and all kinds of stuff in there, but I'm just going to come across here with that dark. And then it gets a little warm, so I'm just going to grab some warmer color that I had in there on my palette. This was, probably a combination of raw sienna, I think a little bit of burnt sienna as well. So not going to fuss too much with what's the right color. There's still a lot of gray in here, so I want to make sure that this gets good and dark underneath here, because that explains the contrast in the actual crystal. So I have seen students take a picture of crystal from one reference and put it into their own setting. And when you do something like that, it doesn't always fit because you've got a lot of differences between what's being reflected in the crystal. And maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously, people do pick up on those things that, something's not right. It'll seem like, can't put my finger on it, just something doesn't fit right. And it's like when perspective's off, Not everybody can tell you exactly why the perspective's off, but they just know. It's something we're familiar with. All right. So there's a little bit of light color above, and it's hardly got any color at all. But it does go through some of this crystal. So I'm going to have to make sure all of this is dry. Why don't I just give this a little speed dry. Okay, I muted while I did that, but I actually wouldn't even need to make this line crisp like that. I could have softened this when I was doing it, and maybe I will do that because this also needs to be darker. This is not exactly dark enough yet, so just going to take a little bit of light color. And okay, so there's kind of a band of trim on that house there, so I'm going to, my neutral tint's going to run, blot that quick, and I'm just going to fade that away. Some clean water and fade that off. There's not much color at all, but it's a little bit. Some undissolved color. Some paint crumbs in there, which is messing me up a little bit. So you should really make sure you've stirred your paint well so that doesn't happen. All right, so some of this color is going to have to appear in my vase or in my glass. Doesn't make sense that it's so gray behind, right? So I need to bring some of this in, and I'm going to go right through all the top of the crystal. I'm going to come into the grayed areas that I did before so that I have continuity. This is what I mean by, you know, if you take one reference and you plop it into another setting, that it won't fit right. So this coloring, since it matches my background, is connecting the background to my subject. I'm not making it very perfect here, it's not necessary, but that's wanting to bleed in there. All right, so now my background looks like it goes right through, but not through my highlights. I did paint around those. I'm just going to take a little more neutral tint and darken up some of this a little bit. Let's go a little darker here and here. Now that could be a tabletop, that could be any number of things. I wanted the light behind, so I kind of got a house, but now I'm just going to blot my brush. And if I run a blotted brush just lightly along the top, that will soften that upper edge. Why do I want to do it? Because I want all the crispness to be in my main subject. If I make the background a little bit blurry looking, it will look out of focus. Okay, so I think that just about wraps it up. I want to keep this damp here. I'm going to use a synthetic brush for this. This neutral tint is one that really reactivates easily. So I'm just going to keep my eye on this edge. I don't want it to end up being a new hard edge. So just coming along here with my blotted brush. All right, so there is my demo for this morning. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, if you have any requests for other demos for upcoming YouTube lives, then by all means put it in the comments section or in the chat. I will see either one, and I will, I'll probably, I could fuss and play with this a little bit more. I could see down here, I could probably get a little darker in some of these spots, you know, just emphasize some of this a little bit more, that type of thing. I always find something else. Just when I say, oh, I think I'm just about done for today, I always find some other little thing. But yeah, this is the little stuff you can fuss with afterwards, but the general idea of the crystal is there. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next week, same time, same channel. Thanks so much. See you later.